Claire, what a pleasure to meet you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are recording a short conversation about coaching in education. Claire is an experienced educator and a certified coach. So maybe Claire, I'll just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Luba. Yes, hi everybody, I am Claire and I work in Shanghai for a large international school group. I've been in education for coming up to 15 years now, both in the UK and abroad, here in China and in Hong Kong. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to move out of working directly in a single school and work across multiple schools in a learning and development position, which was really the first time that my eyes opened to the possibilities around how we could use coaching. So coaching for me is still fairly new. And when I first started with it, I was plagued by regret, right? Regret with the conversations I'd had, the decisions I'd made, the things that I used to hold very dear to myself as achievements, I started to question. And coaching has had a significant impact on my life and my work, and hopefully even more so in the future, the work of others. So I'm super happy to join this conversation today.
Lovely. I remember when you first reached out to me on LinkedIn, you were very determined. You were like, I know this is what I want to do. I know I need that. How can we get started? When's the next course? How can I get enrolled? And I was really interested in your determination. Like, you knew that coaching was something you needed as an educator, as an educational leader. And how did that happen? Where did that determination come from?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a memory indeed. I think, like a lot of educators, when we get the bit between our teeth, we just can't let go, right? We're a very determined bunch. And when we see a need, we can be quite persistent. And the reading I'd done and the work I'd done up to that point had focused more on mentoring. And through that, I found myself just reading more about coaching and almost like being, this is it, this is what I need to explore. And just felt, really driven to explore that, maybe look for, is this the hidden treasure? Is this the gold at the end of the rainbow? There's just something pulling to me towards coaching that really spoke to the type of leader and educator that I wanted to be, and that I thought was often missing, particularly in international education. So that was really the driver for me back then.
Okay, and how did that play out?
Well, I passed. So long story short, we got through to the end of that. It was a really great journey. It happened during COVID as well, during lockdown. So we were all obviously forced to do everything online. And like any learning experience, when you're thrown into a diverse group of people you've never met before, that can be difficult. That can be a challenge. I wasn't the only educator in that group, but what we did have was diverse backgrounds and experiences and cultures. And that kind of undertone was everything in coaching, right? There's like so many layers to this, but just being in a situation where you're learning alongside people that you wouldn't normally, associates maybe a strong word, but you wouldn't normally necessarily come across in your sort of day-to-day work, was really eye-opening. And it meant that when we were practicing our coaching skills and tools, it was genuine, because we had a genuine interest in exploring each other. And undoubtedly some awesome friendships and professional relationships have come out of that program as well.
Lovely. And I know that after the program, you created a program for your group of schools and invited all the leaders to learn coaching skills to a certain extent. And could you maybe speak more about the program, something that you can and allowed to share, and how did that work in general, whether the educational leaders involved in the program found it valuable, whether it reached the goals that you were setting for that?
Yeah, sure. One of the first ins that I was aware of was that we had a large cohort of developing leaders. At the time, we had approximately 130 of our middle and senior leaders going through an internal leadership development program. And I really wanted to introduce them to coaching. As with most schools, the difficulty comes in recognizing that the ones that we want to impart these skills with, these leaders, they're also line managers. And we have to be careful of the relationship. We can use a coaching approach, but sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, a coaching conversation with somebody, is difficult if the waters are muddied by the fact that they're you're their appraiser, for example, you're their line manager. It shifts that relationship, and means that when you're the leader having that conversation as well, it's very, very hard to separate showing up for the person with yes, but this is why, yes, but you need to do this, yes, but I need you to be accountable for X or Y. So what I wanted to do is to explore coaching approach with these leaders, looking at the fundamentals of coaching in a way that allowed them to be better practitioners within leadership and within their own classrooms, without feeling like they needed to go and sit down in a meeting room, say, right, we've got 45 minutes, let's have a coaching conversation. It's not really about that. At scale right now, or at least, at the time for that that wasn't possible. But what was possible was providing people with a greater sense of awareness about how they could use these tools every single day in their daily interactions. So that's what we did. And it was super successful. There's two sides to this. There's one that says the feedback was everybody really enjoyed it, which is great, right? But the best feedback were the emails, the messages, the data that we collected that said, this is really useful. This has changed how I lead day to day. And that's the ticket that I was looking for back when I first started exploring coaching myself.
That's beautiful. Congratulations. Sounds like a great success.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Going to practical examples, could you probably illustrate a few examples of how coaching can be used by teachers in their classroom, how coaching can be used with students or even parents or fellow teachers, or by educational leaders towards their teachers and peers, like in this wider school system?
Yeah, there's some pieces that really shout out to me there, just listening to some of the examples you shared. Not to stereotype, but I think educators generally are problem solvers. They want to jump in, they want to solve, they want to catch people before they fall. It's what often brings people into education. They have this desire to serve, to be of service to others, and they get a great deal of satisfaction out of that feeling of catching. And while that's really lovely, it's such an endearing quality, it's not always helpful. So whether it's with other adults, other professionals, or whether it's with children, the first thing that we looked at was, how do we stop rushing in with the answer? How do we kind of take off the hero cape and just hold the space for people rather than rushing in to solve their problem, to tell them what to do? And we do that with such good intention, right? There's so many experienced, knowledgeable educators here in China and internationally, you know, across the world, we have this tendency to want to solve. So just equipping people with the skill to hold back, and even to just ask the question, hey, do you need some advice here, or would you just like me to listen? Just that one question is so powerful. Engaging with the person you're speaking to and inquiring, what do you need from me in this space? How can I best serve you today? Are you after some advice, or are you just venting? How would you like me to show up for you in this conversation? That's super empowering for both parties that are involved. Another example that comes to mind is that in our early years education setting, we have this belief that all emotions are acceptable and all behaviors are not. And then as children get older, we condition them to mute those emotional responses, right? They are conditioned to believe that responding across the full spectrum of emotions is no longer acceptable, and they should be suppressed. And I think this is the same with adults, right? We've learned this. This is learned experience from childhood. How do we take that approach and utilize that across different age groups? How do we convince the teenager that it's okay to feel like you feel? You know, emotions are a very human response. That's what makes us human. And that emotional response is okay. It's what we do with it. It's how it's channeled, whether that's channeled positively or to negative consequences. There's a lot that we do in early years practice that we lose very, very quickly as students get older. And sometimes I think it's just as simple as holding on to that regard that we have for our youngest learners. How do we maintain that through their school experience, and remind them that it's okay to feel that spectrum? And that kind of sense of unconditional positive regard that we have for our youngest learners is something we can hold on to as students progress. And like I say, even in the conversations we have with others.
We often say that coaching is a great modality to use because it helps someone become more autonomous. It develops agency. It helps someone to be accountable. So it's not really only about solving tactical problems, but it's also about helping a person to see how resourceful they are, how creative they can be, that they can actually change something. They can be, you know, in charge of their own life and all the positive changes they want to make, and they can start to think in opportunities rather than think in limitations. So I was wondering if this is something that schools can support with, because, you know, younger people, or children, teenagers, spend a lot of time at school, and especially in China.
One of my experiences working in education is that we quickly expand our view to the possibilities, and sometimes that makes the process overwhelming. So when I speak to school leaders about utilizing coaching with learners, and they get to know a little bit more about some of those steps, their mind ultimately goes to, well, how are we going to fit this into the day? We need a dedicated time to meet with every student or small groups of students. How does this affect the curriculum? Does it feed in? Do we need a new curriculum? How does this affect our teaching and learning, our pedagogical approach? And it's just boom, boom, boom. Their mind just explodes with the possibilities, but also it becomes overwhelming very quickly. So one of the things that we've looked at with our schools is the ins, right? The ways that we can take baby steps to see meaningful progress, objective progress that we can measure, utilizing more of a coaching approach before we go crazy, before we get into, do we need to dedicate time in the day to this? How does that affect the time? All of those questions, we ask people to just put them to one side and consider that a roadmap. You know, these are questions that can come much later. right now we're playing. Consider it again, it's like an ECE reference. How do we encourage educators to be playful in how they experiment with a different sort of set of tools, a different toolkit? One of the tools that I've seen used really well in our schools with learners and also with adults, our middle leaders love this, is a technique called the 4 A's. Super quick and easy to do. It's just agenda, awareness, action, and accountability. So making sure that instead of kind of telling the children what the problem is that they're facing, asking them, what's the challenge here for you? What's the connection to what we were learning yesterday, or what's your connection to this person's project or work? And then moving to action and asking them, what do you need? What action steps have you got to take to move you to that next milestone? And then the final A with accountability, just holding the space for children by saying things like, when does this need to be achieved by? How would you feel if you achieved that first step? Are there any challenges that you foresee? What might get in your way here? So just utilizing a really simple coaching technique to switch the relationship, to empower learners to feel a greater sense of ownership within their learning.
Lovely. Well, I love that. It sounds very similar to the PBL approach, to project-based learning, where students are invited to really think through the project and all the steps that are needed and all the resources and how they're going to collaborate to get that done. Could you provide maybe another practical example? I really enjoy listening to these simple practical tips, because this is something that those who watch this recording can really take and implement literally the following day if they wish.
Yeah, I mean, this links to that PBL approach. It links to inquiry. One of the challenges I think a lot of our schools face is that as students get into the examination years and we're governed by specifications, set national curriculums and international curriculums, we feel compelled by this sort of huge textbook, right? We've got to cover this textbook. And one of the big challenges that we're working through right now is, how do we ensure that learning is still inquiry focused, is student focused, despite with this massive curriculum? And one of the ways we do that in the classroom is we encourage our teachers to utilize like hook questions. So, for example, I'm an economics teacher by trade. So one way that I might do this is, for the starter, when students are coming into my classroom, on the board, it will say something quite triggering. So I might put a passage up that says, overweight people should not have access to state healthcare, or smokers should not have access to state healthcare. Something that connects them to the topic, that is going to drive the learning, but creates a sense of identity, right? They can all connect to this particular question because it will trigger a story, a relationship, something within their lives. And it's our responsibility to support students in making those connections. People often assume that project-based learning, inquiry-based learning is a free-for-all, and the teacher's kind of, making a coffee and the kids are just getting on with it without support. And that's just not the reality. Actually, project-based learning done well is highly scaffolded. The teacher may not be in the center of the room, but they have orchestrated that learning experience in a way that students are empowered along that individual pathway. And that often takes more planning initially to do rather than less planning. But if we can create situations where students can connect what they're learning about to their own lives, can connect to broader concepts social constructs, their place in the world, what we start to build are global citizens, right? That have an appreciation for a system outside of themselves and a system that they exist in, and the multiple kind of facets of that and how they start to connect. And when they do that, they start to be able to build in that cross-curricular understanding, that interdisciplinary understanding. It's not forced, it's born out of what they bring to the table themselves. So when I start a lesson with a question like that, students will naturally navigate to their scientific knowledge. Students will naturally navigate to, some of the students will say, well, hold on a second, let's have a look at the data on this. You know, they'll be driven to get their calculator out. In other situations, students might say, well, actually, culturally, you know, where I'm from, being of this size is, you know, is recognized. You're considered esteemed within the community, within society, if you are a larger person. So those opportunities to bring in that multicultural understanding as well, they exist when we start with a question rather than our own agenda. And I think that can be super powerful, even at university level and beyond, right? There's so much power in asking better questions.
Earlier, when you talked about the implementation of coaching at schools, and you said that a common question is, how are we going to do this? Do we need to reorganize our practices, or do we need to revisit our curriculum and do some fixes? This reminded me of how we deliver leadership development programs at Upthink Coaching. And when I bring the program into an organization, it's like 6-7 months, and they see it, oh, this is extra workload in addition to what we already do. But the thing is that our curriculum is super customized. We don't use cookie cutter solutions. So basically, we did lots of interviews. We collected lots of feedback. We learned what changes they want to see in the company. We built a curriculum around this. We created very practical tasks that allow them to integrate this new learning into their day-to-day work. And I think this is the idea that I've been promoting all the time, you know, like, this is not adding work. This is not extra work to you. You are just changing the way you do day-to-day things. But all the things that you do daily, these are all the same. You still need to have meetings. You still need to have some job interviews. You still need to support your team. You still need to work cross-functionally. So your day-to-day tasks are all the same. And here's just some new tools. Here's some new approaches for you to do this. Just do it differently. And I think many people perceive, oh, I need to do my regular work tasks. And on top of this, here comes this leadership development where I do something unrelated. And I think this perception is not accurate at all. So I'm very much promoting the idea of integration all the time, very seamless integration. And how can coaching be seamlessly integrated into daily practices at schools at all levels, I guess, by teachers, by educational leaders, you know, how can be reflected in school culture, for example, so that it doesn't require any special adjustments or reorganizations?
It was exactly the problem that we were facing last year. We went in hard with loads of awesome professional development. There were so many great opportunities last year. It's something that I'm really proud to have built. But what we were also aware that it felt like extra, right? It felt like it was just on top. Oh, now I need to figure out how to put this in. Now I need to dedicate more time to that. There's just not enough hours in the day. And we went through an exercise this summer just gone, looking at the sort of the key learning areas that we have introduced over the last 18 months to 2 years, And how do we identify the pieces that solve existing problems or challenges? So we went into the curriculum. We looked at things like our service learning. We looked at our well-being curriculum. We looked at our homeroom curriculum and said, what challenges do people face? You know, where do they feel ill-equipped in these areas? And we started to map the resources. So we kind of did this for them in a way, but showed them the path. So we identified pain points, challenges, areas of the curriculum people felt were more difficult to address. And we took the tools that they knew they'd got because they'd been in these programs, and we had embedded them into those places as suggestions and said, for this particular area, for this learning objective, consider using this tool. Reference, growth mindset training, resource here, right? And we made it off the shelf in that way. The same with our student mentoring. All of our homeroom teachers in our schools, they do regular student mentoring, but most have never had any mentoring or professional coach training and just felt generally ill-equipped, right? There's a few layers to this. There's the safeguarding piece, and then there's this kind of skill piece about what to do, how to address those conversations. So again, we'd break it down and say, okay, this is a challenging area. Here's a resource that we actually looked at in this training program. Here's a suggestion about how it could be used, which was time well spent, because the 10 to 15 examples that we embedded into those areas has now grown, is now close to 50, not created by us, but created by the teachers themselves that have said, oh, actually, now this has been modeled, you know, when we did that, we could use that here. Would you think other people would benefit from that? Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not a fit, if it's not like resonating with them, no problem. They still have the, you know, the lesson, they still have the curriculum. Here we have just a number of suggestions of how to utilize those tools. So we hope that kind of library will increase in a way that people feel that connection, that integration with the programs that we do.
Towards the end of our conversation, I wanted to pick your brain on what do you think is possible? What's the future of coaching in education? Could that be that we are generally underuse it and it could be used more and we can reap more benefits from using coaching at a wider scale? Or do you think it's used to its maximum potential at the moment?
I think we're barely scratching the surface. Every stone you look under comes back to coaching, right? There's not a day that goes by that I don't think to myself, oh, there's something from coaching that would really help there. Just adulting, right, in every professional context requires coaching. I see it in how I respond in my relationships. And everything we do is relational, right? Whether it's within the workplace or at home. And coaching is such a powerful resource just when it comes to that relational piece. Just this week, I've sort of had my eyes opened, if you like, to how coaching would improve the conversations we're having around feedback. It comes back to this idea again of educators wanting to solve and wanting to offer advice. And we're often put in situations where we're giving feedback to others that is subjective, that is, you know, highly opinion based. And we make it about what you could have done, you know, oh, but you could have done this and you should have done that. Rather than using an approach that encourages us to remain more objective, to hold the other person in high, you know, positive regard, and recognize that they have made the decisions that felt right to them in that moment. They are professionals after all. How can we hold that position when we're having a feedback conversation? How can we create better questions that focus on the big idea? So, you know, if I'm looking at a lesson, my ultimate go-to is progress. Are students making progress? So rather than going into a feedback situation saying that activity you did made no sense with your learning objectives, half the kids didn't get it, no progress was made, reframing that to not be about me and my opinion, and saying, so that activity in the middle of the lesson, you know, what thoughts went into designing that? Or how did that activity get you closer to your learning objectives? What progress did students make because of that activity? And all of a sudden the teachers are like, they didn't. Oh, okay, what might you do differently next time? You know, do you think there's a way to re-engineer this activity? Not mine, right? Not my lesson, not my kids, not my context. But if we're both driven by that same measure, and we know what that measure is, students making academic progress in this learning experience, then I can design questions that get them to understand that in themselves, rather than it being about me and my feedback to them. I'm imparting it to them. And then you start to see how this could be so useful just for any kind of difficult conversation. And working in multicultural contexts, there are a lot of difficult conversations. There are a lot of misunderstandings that could be avoided, I think, quite often, if we just stopped and thought about how we reframe our questions. I've sneaked another example in there. Apologies, Luba. But yes, to go back to my point, it's endless. This is endless. You know, once we've kind of embedded one aspect, that broadens the path. Okay, like any learning experience, you're not done. There's no destination. All that happens is you get to the top of the mountain and your view expands once again. And that's where I feel, you know, I'm personally at with coaching right now, is that those initial practices, we're seeing them become embedded, we're seeing them come to fruition, and then it's just opening up all of these other avenues to explore. So I don't think we'll ever be done. I may always feel like we're only ever scratching the surface of how we could use coaching in education.
Well, this is what lifelong learning is about.
Yeah.
Last question. You were not completely new to coaching when we met. You said you read something about it. You're an educator, so you were supporting others with learning. Mentoring is very common in schools, as you said. So you already kind of touched this from different areas. What was the benefit of taking professional coach training, and how did that change your approach, given that you already knew something about coaching?
Before coach training, like formal coach training, coaching was something that was done to others. It was something I could have in my toolkit and I could use it on other people. And going through the course, going through the program, taught me far more about myself. The benefit of doing a formal program is that kind of that inner work, and recognizing that if you think that coaching is just a skill you acquire to do to other people, you're missing the point. It's about that self-awareness. You've got to understand self first, what governs your decision-making, what governs your actions, what's triggering you. You know, before coach training, I could get so het up about something and never take the time to explore, you know, what's that about? Why do I feel so confronted by that conversation or that person? What's going on there for me? Is it an attack of my values? What value is that? Where else does it show up? How important is it? Starting to explore self, and then being able to step back from myself in a way and take that kind of higher view, shift perspective, when you go through formal coach training, it becomes far more about understanding you, your motives, your behaviors. And it's only truly when you have a sense of that you use the tools as they were designed. Anyone can read the books, right? And you can take the toolkit, you can take the questions, and you can go off and, okay, I'm going to do some coaching. And you may have good success. The real wins are when you understand that coaching mindset and that coaching presence, understanding self, what drives you, what triggers you, what motivates you, and that you are not your emotions, you are not your responses. They come and go. So being able to hold a bit of detachment to that as well, that's what allows you to be able to hold that regard for others, to remain objective, to hold that space, because you've seen those pieces already uncovered in yourself. That for me was the biggest learning from doing the formal training. Yeah.
Thank you. That's profound. As I was listening, I thought back to your feedback example. If a leader gives feedback, they can just go through the steps and they can read a guide on how to give constructive feedback. But if they are emotional in the process, if they are distracted and not being present, if they cannot create a safe space, right? If they cannot build trust with the person to whom they are giving feedback, then this feedback may not work and the person may still feel insecure and defensive. And it's really not the actions, it's not the doing, but the being contributes so much to this, because we as relational beings respond to the person, but not only what they do to us.
Oh, for sure. I experienced this myself just this week. Was called into a meeting, and the person leading the meeting used a great coaching question, but it was the first thing that came out of her mouth. And I was caught completely off guard. I didn't know this is what we were doing today. And the rest of the meeting just went really downhill very quickly, because there hadn't been that shared understanding of what we would be doing in that session, in that time together. It caught me off guard, and I felt in the moment a little confronted by it. But it was a brilliant example of somebody just kind of taking a tool and going, oh yeah, that'll be perfect for today, blah. But not being able to read the room and go, oh, that was misplaced. How do we recover this? It was just carry on, keep going, without that sense of there's something not quite right with how we've approached this today. So yeah, I see that happen a lot.
Thank you so much, Claire, for your perspective and sharing. I'm really glad that we were able to touch multiple paths in this conversation: young learners and teenagers and classrooms and educational leaders, and giving feedback piece and all the conversations and practices. Is there anything else that you think is important that we missed in this conversation? Is there another idea that you want to be heard?
I would say that the one other way that I've seen coaching really have an impact with leadership is engaging with that perspective shift. So I just wanted to finish up with this. I work in an organization that's 91 years old and has 3,000 employees. And we quickly forget just how much is unknown by the bulk of our workforce. And when people get frustrated, they're angry about a change that's been made, they feel like it's all been put on them. What they don't necessarily have is the full picture, the full piece of information. And sometimes we can't give it. right? Sometimes it's something that we can't share. But coaching or utilizing coaching questions can allow those people to shift their perspective, to consider whether you agree or disagree with it, what might have influenced that decision, what factors might be contributing to why this change has happened. And it feels very fast for you when in my mind, I'm thinking this has been 12 months in the making, but okay. Right. So because there's asymmetry of information. And sometimes that is a necessity in business, right? It's not just in education, that's just sometimes a necessity. So just offering opportunities for people to explore different perspectives has been really powerful.
Lovely. Thank you. I hear we are starting another conversation about building a culture of open-mindedness in organizations. And this is such a big topic, just that deserves a separate conversation.
For sure.
So maybe with your permission, we'll start closing here. And thank you so much for being my guest and our guest this morning. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Luba. Thank you for having me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.